Every civil engineer wants to hear from leaders in their field. Well, this is the Civil Engineering CEO. This is the show where we talk to the leaders in civil engineering. Now, in this episode, we're going to do something special. We're going to go back and look at all of our episodes, and we've pulled out the 10 most listened episodes and pulled one game-changing piece of career advice out for civil engineers. So you're about to get 10 pieces of career advice from 10 CEOs in the industry. But first, a word from our sponsor. Before we go on here, I'd like to recognize our sponsor for this episode, Tensar International.
Check out Tensar Plus, the award-winning design software for construction professionals to design with geosynthetics and calculate their value on projects. Tensar Plus is simple to use with a powerful engineering system at its core. Whether you're designing a crane pad or need to build a temporary road over muck, the cost, time, and carbon savings can be calculated, making comparison with alternatives simple. Whatever you're working on, Tensar Plus is your toolbox for success.
Starting off in 10th place, episode number 11 featured a conversation with Steve Donahue, licensed professional engineer and president at Horner and Schifrin Inc., about how you can remain productive as an engineering leader by increasing your productive flow and working smarter. Let's hear what he had to say about this.
Civil engineering is a team sport. You have to work together as a team. You have to communicate as a team. You have to communicate to your clients what's going on. So it is super important that we are able to share ideas and information. You know, if a piece of information isn't communicated to the right people, it can cause problems in the projects. It can cause projects to not be designed correctly. So as engineers, we have to hone in our communication skills. And, you know, looking at civil engineers in general, that's probably something that doesn't come as easy as most people, you know, to be good communicators.
Coming in at number 9, episode number 7, where I talked to Ron Wathen, licensed professional engineer, president at QK, about the importance of keeping a company connected. Ron provided some great tips on how engineering leaders and managers can keep their teams connected and ensure the emotional well-being of their employees. Let's listen to Ron's great piece of advice.
We went virtual basically overnight. I remember March 18th, we sent everybody home in 2020, and March 19th, we all woke up and we're using Microsoft Teams to coordinate. And we had a real sense of connectedness during that time. It was a crisis, and we were all committed to working together. And we found out that we could work remotely and in an environment where we could be effective checking in. We had daily check-ins and those kinds of things. We also know that as the world is coming back to a more in-person world, we are looking at it as there are some people that can do remote hybrid work just fine, but there are others where we feel like there might be some career stunting, especially with younger engineers or professionals. You know, how do they get the FaceTime with clients? How do they get the mentoring from senior engineers? And we know that some of that can happen through the remote environment, which works well. But we also know that we talked about soft skills and we talked about that type of development. It's really hard working from your home to develop those kinds of necessary skills to become what we call a true professional, right? So David Maister wrote this book called True Professionalism, and it talks about becoming a trusted advisor, and it talks about becoming a complete professional, not just great technically, but great on the people skill side, and just caring about your clients, caring about your team members, and that's sort of how they characterize a complete professional. And that's what we want for our team. We want them to develop as a professional and not just as a technical expert. And so because think about it. If you've ever been to the doctor, or especially if you've ever had a loved one in the hospital and you're waiting for the doctor to come, that doctor that can sit down and explain what's happening to you as the family, that's really a lot like what we do as professional engineers and land surveyors and the like. If we can come in and help our client really understand what's really happening on a project, or the types of challenges we might have to face, not just now, but down the road in 2 or 3 or 4 steps. Those are the professionals that are truly successful in our world.
Yeah, that's great. And I really like, again, you sounds like you're taking a very flexible approach with this and understanding that, yeah, there's a lot of things you could do from home or remote, but there are things you cannot. You need to make sure that you're sensitive to those. I mean, I agree with you from the development standpoint of a person. Those client interactions, attending those meetings are valuable, but at the same time, I think we've all learned that there are things that can be done in the world of engineering remotely that we never thought could be done. So I think in a lot of ways, this whole experience has helped us learn a little bit more about how, civil firms can operate. And I think that it's been a positive experience.
We have employees in 6 states, and in areas where we don't have offices, and it's working for us. And we've been able to recruit and retain talent because we're willing to do that. And it's definitely, we're blazing a trail here, I think, Anthony. I think, some clients, they don't want to meet in person. They know you have to get in the car and drive to them, and
You gotta pay
they're fine meeting on Teams or Zoom, and that's great. So it's definitely a new world, and we're trying not to be too hard, take too hard of a line, but also make sure that we're guiding and have a culture that we can build on, and a connectedness with our team.
That's great. And I think that last point that you just made about people in other states where there is no in-office option really speaks to the next question that I wanted to ask you. And of course, there's this new bill, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is a huge deal, $1 trillion of funding coming through for infrastructure work across the US, which is sorely needed, as we all know. That being said, though, we've already talked about how trying to find enough talent in this industry is difficult to begin with. And now there's more funding, there's going to be more projects, there's going to be more work, and we're going to have a bigger problem. And so it sounds to me like one of the possible solutions to that problem is exactly as you just kind of suggested, is having people that are working remotely. You can expand your workforce, potentially find other people without the limitations of geography. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit and your thought process on that.
I think if you look at our professional, land surveyors, civil engineers, and the great retirement that's happening, we're definitely going to see a shortage in talent and available team members, and so you have to think out of the box. Years ago we were looking at doing shipping CAD work overseas, for example, at night, and then getting it back, and we did try some test cases there and just found it to be a little too cumbersome. But we know that we can be successful working with our platform that we talked about in technology. We can be successful with people working all throughout the United States. And as long as we do the things that we always preach, communicate, stay connected, work through problems together, all those things are doable. And I think that many other companies are going to be doing that as well. The days of having everyone in the office, by the way, that wasn't a silver bullet either. There was always things that had to be worked out in office, being in the office. So I think that's definitely something that we've looked at to try to, add. We definitely went through being 50 years old. And one of the hard parts about as you get between 40 and 50 years old as a firm is you keep turning over your market leaders. You keep turning over your management and your leadership. And likewise, your talent, your clients turnover, your agency, key agency partners turnover and change. And so you have to be able to continue to replenish your resources and have that spirit of what built the company, have people take ownership of that and continue that growth and stability.
At number 8, episode number 17, which featured a discussion with Gil Hanch, licensed professional engineer, president and CEO at MSA Professional Services, Inc., about how to lead and successfully build an AEC consulting firm by focusing on both the short and long term. Let's hear what Gil had to say.
I think that is one of the things that I brought to the position. And going back to your point earlier about technical people being ready for this, I mean, not every technical person is cut out to be a leader, and communication skills are an absolute must-have. You've got to be at the top of your game. You could look at the CEO as the chief communications officer because you have so much leverage, and people read into every word I say or how I say it. So I have to be very intentional about that. So sensing what the situation demands of me, sensing what people are needing from me in the moment, whether it's a very serious message, whether I have bad news to deliver. If it's bad news, you just tell them. People don't want you to beat around the bush. Be very frank, but we still always have to be positive. And I don't mean any kind of false optimism, but even when we had our more challenging years operationally, how are we going to get better from here? Every one of these was a milestone along the journey that we were on. And I was steadfast in my belief that we were on a journey to a better place. When there's good news, we have to we have to celebrate, but we can't create, unrealistic optimism. Everything in its place. So I really try and find that middle ground. How do I keep myself from overreacting? Oftentimes, if somebody comes to my door and they come in and they close the door, I'm already going to a much darker place than what they're going to have to share with me. So when they finally share with me what they've got to share, I'm like, oh, is that all? That's not a problem. Right. It's like one of my good clients would always say, I would have some news, some bad news for her on a project about a bid or something. And I'd prepare for it. She said, Gil, are babies going to die because of this? And I said, no. Babies aren't going to die because of this. And then she would say, well, then we don't have a problem. Then let's get into it. So that was one worldview. So again, really knowing that any message that you send is going to have ripple effects through the organization. And if I'm downcast and people read that, people are going to magnify that. If I'm upbeat and optimistic, people might overshoot. So if you think about some kind of an oscillating curve, the reaction of my audience is probably going to be more extreme. And I kind of have to hug to that middle ground, not to let people get, too down, but we need to confront the bad news, or too up and say, we did great, but let's put that in context of how we can still continue to improve.
No, that's great. I really like that, because I think that one of the challenges for engineering professionals in terms of continuous development is everyone wants to tell engineering professionals, whether it's through training or content, that they need to be great communicators, but not everyone tells them how to do it. And so I think that your advice there is good, in that the bottom line is while you need to be sensitive to the audience and who's receiving the information, that doesn't mean you water down the information that you're giving them, right? You got to tell them like it is, but you also need to be sensitive and just think through how they're going to receive it, right? It's like just being a little bit more strategic and having some forethought around how you're going to communicate and how they're going to respond to it. And I think that's really solid advice, because I know people ask me all the time, well, how do I communicate better? And that's one good strategy.
Couple things, think about it in terms of messaging. And we really, again, I don't think it's inauthentic, but you really have to think about, if I say it this way, how is that going to be perceived? So let's really make sure we get the messaging right. Let's don't bury the lead, get the important things up front, but give people some context. Don't leave people hanging. And in particular, uncertainty is one of the things that really triggers a negative reaction in people. So if you're giving a message, you really better be thinking about, am I telling them everything that they need to know? Because if I only tell them half the story, they're going to make up the rest, and it's going to be a lot worse than what it really is. And people really get anxious about uncertainty. And then the coffee station time, the heads over the cubicle, you generate all this negative energy when there's uncertainty. And that isn't helping you get projects done and get billable hours and move the organization forward. So you got to be really sensitive for the types of things that will trip people's brain, their limbic brain, to react to something that they're not getting from your communication. The other thing I would say, I've been a lifelong reader. I was blessed as a kid to enjoy reading, and my parents read to me, and I always had books around. And so for me, reading is second nature. And literally, you can become a better communicator by osmosis through reading and seeing how people use language and being very intentional about the words. And then I take that into my writing and edit what you wrote, reread it, and reorganize it. And again, be really intentional about what you want to say. You just can't toss things off or wing it when you're the CEO, because the risk is too great that it isn't going to come across right, despite your best intentions. And then you have cleanup work to do. So
in seventh place, episode number 3, where I talked to Anya O'Dwyer, licensed professional engineer, principal and CEO of Innovate Engineering, about why it's important to navigate change in the civil engineering world. And also, Anya expanded on one of the things that we should all be concerned about with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Here's a short clip from Anya. And make sure that people are comfortable in the work environment and allow them to really do the work they love to do. And really, at the end of the day, regardless of size of company or industry, like you said, are people getting their work done? Do they have goals, and are they achieving those goals? Because if they are, then that's what really matters most in any business. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of leads me into our next question of technology. Obviously, there's different technologies and tools we've been using to work remotely. But in general, technology is so important in the civil engineering industry, whether it's BIM or different survey techniques like LiDAR, and drones keep getting more advanced, and different programs like Civil 3D. How have you at Innovate, how do you keep up with this technology? How do you monitor new technologies and what you should be using? How do you figure out what tools you need to implement and bring into the business? Talk to us about what that process looks like for you.
So, from the beginning of Innovate, we kind of started off with, we don't want to do things just because that's the way they've always been done, right? So we've been using Teams for since the beginning, right? Teams for a lot of companies was a COVID thing, and virtual meetings and things like that. And that's a very simple example, but everything we've done, we've been paper free since the beginning. Like someone made a joke about how to photocopy the other day, because I can't remember the last time I photocopied something. So, as a company, we're kind of, we set things off like that, right? Like, if we're going to do things, we don't want to use something that's the old way of doing it. It's got to be from this point forward. So that's kind of how we started things off. When it comes to software, a lot of what we do is it's discipline directed, right? So we invest in softwares and technologies just based on what our clients need, what the project needs, and we're not kind of grandfathering things in, right? We're not using an older version of a certain software because we paid for it and we don't want to pay for the latest version. That's kind of not really a philosophy that we would ever follow. But when it comes to from this point forward, the industry as a whole is moving in that direction. I think COVID forced our industry to really adapt and embrace technology in a way that I think is fantastic. The big, a lot of times I get asked this question even before COVID about, technology and what are you doing? And I think the question I always asked back was, as consultants, as engineers, we're often bound by what our clients require. And if they say you have to use software X, then we have to use software X. So we were somewhat restricted by, the clients that we work for. And if they're super innovative, then, we're going to have that platform for that project. And COVID was great for our clients because it forced them, especially the public agencies, it forced them to have to change how they do things, right? Like, their processes, their procedures, the paperwork requirements that you had to submit every month, that's all been forced to change. And they had to figure out how to work from home, and it worked, and they were okay with it. And they no longer need to use this 20-year-old software. And so that's how I see the shift happening. And I think that's a great technology shift that happened. It wasn't the engineers that were holding back the expansion into being more technologically advanced. A lot of times when you work in the public sector, especially, a lot of times it was the clients that hold it back.
Episode number 13 claimed the 6th spot, which featured my conversation with Blake Calvert, licensed professional engineer, president and CEO at Core Consultants, Inc. Blake talked about how you can start a civil engineering company without an MBA, and also shares some of the strategies that he used to start his business during a recession and grow it to a very strong civil engineering firm. Blake, take it away.
I would say starting a company in 2014, when it's a good economy and things are going well and the work is coming in and you're able to recruit and get more people to kind of get things going. Certainly, as you're scaling it, there's stress and can be some growing pains there. But again, when the economy is good, but I learned a lot as a leader, and what I need to do better, obviously the way the last few years have been, is I knew from studying previous major stressors on the economy and just not just our local economy, but the global world, that, when a pandemic hits, what do you do? No one's ever taught me what to do. And so I do see that when the pandemic hit and COVID and trying to decipher what to do, I think I'm an engineer. I definitely, I think as a leader, I try to come in and not be overly emotional. What people need out of a leader is certainly to have empathy and understanding of, because we're dealing with people, but at the same time, sometimes if you're in a panic, you're not helping yourself or your team. They need a steady leader just to come in and logically kind of go through steps, but that's always kind of a battle. And with the pandemic and then some personal setbacks over the last couple of years, I don't think I dealt with stress as good as I could have done, and maybe did start to expose myself that, but I am a human being. And so sometimes we personally go through struggles, and then that does get revealed through our people and everything. But I think we just have to take all that in stride. But people do have a certain expectation and confidence in you. So you kind of have to you want to be vulnerable, but at the same time, they expect you to be the steady Eddie too. And so you kind of have to have your personal self there, but then also integrate, what does the company expect of me every day? Because they're always kind of looking at you to say, what do we do next? And that's kind of where I've had to learn and evolve as a leader through various stages. And again, like I said, I kind of came in as the reluctant entrepreneur and kind of the reluctant leader. I don't really desire to be the figurehead every day and having to be in the spotlight, but it's something you just gain more confidence. And again, when you've got good people around you, it helps you do your job better, and it makes it a lot more fun, when you start developing that structure.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. I don't think there's an equation or a playbook, for this type of thing. It's kind of like one of these things that you're continuing to learn and evolve on. I think like emotional awareness and intelligence is a big part of this. And it's not something that anyone, forget about engineers, but I think anyone is comfortable with, or anyone really learns, except being exposed to these kinds of situations. And I do think owning a company is one way that you can kind of get a crash course on it and get exposed to it and kind of have to deal with it. And I think for me personally at EMI, what I try to remind myself is that, everyone that works here, they're counting on EMI for their, livelihood, right? In terms of like their stability, their family. And so I try to keep that in mind. And I try to say, I want to stay calm. I want to make sure everyone here is calm, because at the end of the day, I want them to be able to go home to their families and say, hey, I've got a good job. Everything is okay. And for me, sometimes that's helpful in dealing with these situations, because if I'm a little nervous, I can try to get rid of those nerves by saying, listen, these people and plus their families. So like multiply our number of employees by 3, 4, 5 people. that's like who I have to kind of think about, you know?
That's exactly my philosophy. I had it under the hood before we started core and as it was getting started, but that's what in these stressful moments, what fills my bucket is I've always thought we needed to be a purpose-led organization, but for me as an individual and as a leader, you see what impact you can have on people's personal lives, and that's what is something I actually I can't even say that I underappreciated it in starting it. That is something I've kind of grown into, of fully recognizing the impact that as people join core and that I can help them in their career. I can teach them to be how to do this. There's no secrets of how to run a consulting company, but I want to teach people to be an entrepreneur. And if they love working at core, I'll embrace that. But if they want to go and take another step to start their own business and to try something else, I'll embrace that and be very satisfied that I at least helped them get to that next step in their career and helped their family and all the things that a company can provide and impact, not just the individual, but the family as a whole. I take that kind of, purpose and meaning to my role very seriously.
At number 5, episode number 4, where I talked to Ori Elihu, President and CEO at NGO, about how they utilize servant leadership and what it's like to work in a company that employs it. Here's what Ori had to say.
I would hope that they all view me as a servant. I would hope that they all view me as one who's committed to serving them, serving our clients, serving our communities, serving our society. We draw the org chart with me on the bottom, and we try to live that way every day. As leaders, our job is to serve, and we measure our individual successes by the growth and the successes of the people that we serve.
In 4th place, episode number 6, which featured a discussion with Jim Salvito, President and CEO at MNS Engineers, about how civil engineering companies can embrace this transition into a hybrid work environment and really adapt to this new environment. Jim, take it away.
For me personally, I tend to be an emotional person. And, I've gone through the Myers-Briggs testing. We're very, strong advocates for MBTI and Myers-Briggs in our organization. So having an understanding of your natural personality type, I tend to be a little bit more emotional and reactive. So having that awareness now guides me into when a situation arises that could, be an emotional reaction trigger. I just take time. I just sit back and I don't react. And then I'll think about the various parameters of that situation and what the decision, what the response should be in a way that is going to come across, as the best decision for our organization. And I'll have some, thought points that I will convey as a result of that action and decision. You talk about COVID, and it was interesting for us. COVID was one of those moments that I think I felt like was challenging, but I felt like we were all in it together, not just our profession and our company, but the whole world in essence was in a situation that we're all going to be looking to each other for innovation and ideas. And I felt like the best thing we can do is just stay calm. When we realized that it was going to require us to work remotely, we told our staff, we said, look, we have the technology in place. We had been building a cloud-first strategy at M&S with our technology and systems for a long time. So all of our critical ERP systems and other systems were in the cloud, as were our file servers. We had recently, at the end of 2020, completed a move from on-premises file servers to Box in the cloud. And so for us, it was really easy for us to tell our employees that worked in offices, take your laptops, go home, and you're going to log into the systems the same way you would in the office. And it was really seamless for us to go through that transition. So we were able to respond. I think when we had the financial crisis, the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009, that was a real challenge for our industry. And We were fortunate that we weren't working for a lot of private development companies at that point. We were primarily public infrastructure based. So we had a little less of an impact, an immediate impact from some of the economic downturns. But ultimately, all these things are problems that if you're an engineer, you probably get into engineering because you like problem solving. And for us, this is just a problem that you feel like is not an insurmountable problem. And you have to look at it and break it down. You have to just stay calm, take a deep breath, look at the problem, break down the problem, and start working piece by piece at what the solutions are. And you have to consider the larger ramifications of whatever that situation is. So we worked hard, for example, during that crisis, we worked hard at really minimizing our layoffs or reducing some people to part-time. We had to do a few of those things, but we really worked hard to minimize that and, share the burden of all that with the whole group. And with COVID, it was the same thing. We just we said, okay, what's changed? We're all working remotely. We need to really ramp up our video meetings like we're doing today. We really have to ramp up our communication because we not only want to make sure our work products are still being prepared and delivered efficiently and at a high quality, but we want to work, we were very concerned about our workforce and some of the mental health impacts and some of the challenges our workforce had, all of a sudden working at home. And, in particular, the families with younger children that, all of a sudden had to become school teachers as well as doing their daily jobs and work within that family bubble all the time. It was really challenging. So we tried to do, a lot more outreach, a lot more just general open communication about how it's going for people. And we tried to provide whatever support we could throughout the organization.
Taking the third spot was episode number 8, which featured Johanna Gessner, CEO and co-founder at Gessner Engineering LLC. Johanna talked about how she takes a high-impact approach to building a successful firm by focusing on what matters most.
Focus on high payoff activities.
Sounds like that's a big theme for you.
It is. Well, if you can tell sometimes you'll look on a timesheet, and if it looks scattershot, how beneficial is that, right? And generally the projects on which they're working are not, what can you get done in half an hour? That's weird, right? That doesn't make sense. How can you really engage with what you're on, unless it was a phone call or something quick? But if you're actually doing some production, I should see chunked time. And so am I focusing? We talk about what's imperative and important every day. But in the morning I personally do, and we encourage our teams to do kind of where am I? Just acknowledge where you are, what's on my mind, how am I feeling before I start my day, and what are my imperatives and importance. And really you shouldn't have more than 2 or 3 imperatives have to get done that day. And then important is just a bonus, right? Just an extra lap. If I happen to be able to do it, that's fantastic. So the same thing should be done with a team member as they're looking at their week and day. Get yourself centered. What is my high payoff activity? I'm going to focus on that. I'm going to turn off all of my notifications. We use Teams. On Teams, I'm going to put my schedule and say focus time, and I'll be available for questions, because technology takes away from that focus and gets in the way of us getting those imperative things done. Then we get panicked. We don't think through things. So that's the high payoff activity is the one thing.
At number 2, it's episode number 2, where I talk with Dave DeLizza, licensed professional engineer, president and CEO at Pannoni, about some of the opportunities and challenges in civil engineering that you should be aware of as a rising civil engineer to advance and grow in your career. Dave, take it away.
For me, I do my best to keep the emotions out of the decision-making process. And I think, you always have to look at, get all sides of the story, get the facts that you can get the facts, whether it's a personnel issue or COVID or anything else. And then I think you just got to give, be fair to everyone involved, take a look at a situation, decide what the pros and cons are and how that situation or decision that you're going to make may affect the firm either positively or negatively. And then that's what you got to go with. I mean, I know sometimes, you got to say, oh, I'll wait for all the information to come in, but sometimes you don't have that luxury. And you got to go with what you got, go with your gut sometimes. But I look at it this way. I'm not going to tell you that every decision I made has been right. that wouldn't be true. But I think the important thing is when you look at the upsides and the downsides of every decision, even if it's not the best decision, make sure that the downside is not too severe. So that's what I've always tried to do. Again, we're engineers, right? So you try to get into the details of things,
Right.
and then figure out, okay, if I do this, what happens? If I do that, what happens? So that's kind of the approach I've always taken.
No, I think that's great. And I think it's a good approach. And I think what's an important piece to take away from that, for me, is we tend to try to want to look at the upside of things. We want to look at the positivity and what's coming down the road, but you also need to understand your downside and what your risk is. And I feel like sometimes we forget about that. And someone in a position like yourself, I mean, you can't forget about that, because the downside and the risk could be very detrimental to obviously a company moving forward. So it's a good perspective, I think.
Yeah, and I think that to add to that, I mean, I've got a board of many people on the board were CEOs of engineering companies or other companies, so I can always run things by board members. I've got our in-house senior management team, the legal counsel, CFO, chief operating officer. And when we need to, our senior management team can get together and kick around some of these discussions. Again, look at the facts and decide where to go. So you collaborate on things also when necessary.
Finally, at number 1, our most listened episode, which was episode number 1, where I talked to Kevin Haney, licensed professional engineer, president and CEO for Collier's Engineering and Design, formerly Mazer Consulting. And Kevin talked about 2 very important traits that he recommends all civil engineers should develop. Here's what he had to say.
I would say the value you provide, well, the first thing is make sure that people, you can't equate the value to the organization to your title in an organization, right? Title means nothing. Somebody's value to an organization is based upon what the duties you perform, the skill sets you have, and your ability to not only just impact the bottom line, but grow other people. That's the value. So whether you're a design engineer, a project engineer, a project manager, whatever that title is, just because you have a higher title doesn't mean you're providing any more value than somebody else, right? So I tell people that all the time, especially with us, as we keep growing so much, people's titles are changing and stuff. I preach it all the time. Your title has nothing to do with your value. So if you want to recognize what your value is to the organization, ask your manager, what am I doing well? What can I improve upon? And when you go home every day, or you wake up the next morning, you should always be thinking, how do I increase my value to this company? Because it's my own personal value as well as my value to the company, right? Because we're all doing this. We're not doing this because it's just fun. We're doing this because we want to support ourselves and support our family and so on, right? So the value is what you can provide with your tangible results. How well your projects are being, making profitability or increasing your revenue. There's tangible results, but don't minimize the intangible results by the mentoring of other individuals to improve their productivity. That's the real value of a person. So
that's great. Yeah. And I like that what you said earlier about, it's not the title, it's like you have job responsibilities, and if you're executing on them and you're successful, then obviously you're bringing value to your company. And I think sometimes where there's a mix up there is if the professional isn't clear on what the expectations of their job are, then they can't meet those expectations. So I often tell engineers, you have performance reviews. Hopefully you have a manager that you can walk into their office and sit down with them and say, hey, listen, what's expected of me over the next 12 months. And then you can kind of get a feel so you can hit them. There's nothing wrong with asking that question, because otherwise you might be to some degree kind of operating in the dark, and, you provide value by doing your job and doing it well. And I think the disconnect there is sometimes people aren't quite sure, what their job is. They're called a project manager, but that could be different things.
Exactly. And people, sometimes poor managers will call people certain things just to not have those tough conversations, to tell those individuals that, you don't have the skill sets to be called this, you don't have the skill sets to be called that. Then all of a sudden, the person might be, say, a project manager, but he really should be a design engineer because he hasn't learned those skills, but yet he's been improperly managed and just given that title for the sake of having a title. So yeah, that reliance on title, I say there's no such thing as years of experience. There's no such thing as seniority. There's no such thing as age. I don't care about any of those three things. I care about what your capabilities are, period. Because if not, I wouldn't be the CEO of a company when I turned 50. I wouldn't be the CEO of a 1,000-person organization, right? So I have to, again, walk the walk. I don't care about years. I care about people's capabilities.
I hope you enjoyed the episode today. This show is focused on helping civil engineers succeed, and I hope you feel that this episode does just that. If you liked it, please consider subscribing to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.